over recent times have maybe steered away from him a bit more because I'm starting to disagree with a lot more of what he's saying. I think just because somebody has a huge following and is deemed to be science-based doesn't necessarily mean they know everything. So I'm going to do something I don't often do, and that's going to be look at a man today. I'm going to do something that may promote a little bit of controversy, but I'm actually going to disagree with said man today, and that's Jeff Nippard, arguably one of the more known science-based lifters in the community and science-based content creators, and we're going to go through his perfect leg day according to science, and I'm going to disagree with a few things. If throughout this video you do actually agree with anything I'm saying, I would appreciate it if you did subscribe to the channel, as it does mean a lot to me.
From there, we're jumping into our first exercise of the day, which is the deadlift for just one heavy top set of 5 reps. And of course, before hitting that top set, we'll do our typical warm-up pyramid, gradually building up in weight first.
I don't agree with the warm-ups. I think how you want to warm up is completely up to you. Some people only do 2 warm-ups, some people do more. If I'm doing something like a tricep pushdown, I'll do 1 or 2. If I'm doing something like a heavy bench press, I'm probably going to end up doing 6 or 7. I'm going to heavily disagree with the first implementation of deadlifts, be that sumo or conventional, and I'm going to explain why in a moment.
Still, since we don't want this strength work to interfere with the remaining leg volume to follow in this workout, we don't want the set to be cripplingly difficult either.
I also don't like when people speak about how like 5 reps is for strength. No, it's not. If you say 3 to 5 is strength, 6 to 12 is hypertrophy, and 15 plus is endurance, firstly, what happened to 13 and 14? Do they not exist? Crazy. Secondly, that's not how it works. That's just what they teach you in PT school, and it's probably worth expanding beyond the book. You can grow doing 5 reps. You could grow very well doing 5 reps. And a matter of fact, I actually program a lot of people to do 5 reps, and I often do many sets of 5 reps.
This is called linear periodization, which is when the rep volume decreases as the weight on the bar increases.
Firstly, deadlifts. I don't back doing deadlifts if your primary goal is hypertrophy. I'm going to assume that, as Jeff is a hypertrophy dude, I know he's a competitive powerlifter as well, he's also a natural pro bodybuilder, that this is in the context of hypertrophy. I would not deadlift in any capacity outside of an RDL or a stiff leg variation. Conventional or sumo, neither one of those works any of the emphasized musculature well enough, in my opinion, to justify doing them when you could replace them with a better alternative. For example, let's look at the conventional deadlift. People will say, oh, I do it for my hamstrings and glutes. Biomechanically, it's not a hamstring movement. You're extending the knee. Therefore, it's actually a lot more quads than it is hamstrings. But because the range of motion is so limited, it's not actually that great for the quads in its first place. I'd do a squat pattern instead. Glutes, sure, you are going to get some glutes, but you're going to get more glutes doing an RDL or maybe even a hip thrust. He's deloading every 6 weeks. I really disagree with. Strongly, I think if you're deloading frequently, in general, you're just leaving a lot of gains on the table. And secondly, quite frankly, if you actually program well enough, depending on your goals, obviously, most people who are purely focused on the context of hypertrophy probably don't need to deload ever, because again, if you program well enough, you should be able to recover from what you're programming and what you're doing in your sessions. Therefore, you shouldn't need to deload. If you're powerlifting, I think it might be a bit different. I think there is value in deloading, so that's a different story. But in the context of hypertrophy, for most people, I probably wouldn't back deloads, but there are a few kind of exceptions to that.
All right, after that heavy top set, we're gonna strip the weight back and do 2 sets of 8 reps on the stiff-legged deadlift.
The stiff-leg deadlift I do back. There are very few variations of the deadlift I support, but RDL and stiff leg are definitely 2 of them there. RDL's typically going to be a little bit more glute bias, whereas the stiff leg will potentially be a bit more hamstring bias, but both of them are actually very effective for the target musculature, being the hamstrings and the glutes. So I actually do back that, and personally this is something I would replace the deadlifts with, although I probably would RDL later on in the session, depending on your goals. Where you program movements is really dependent on what your priorities are. If you have weaker or lagging muscle groups, I typically favor them earlier on in the session. Strong muscle groups maybe later on in the session.
Now, since the deadlifts will be much more hamstring and glute dominant, we're focusing on smashing the quads here with some high volume leg press.
Yes, leg press for quads, I love it, but if you're going to leg press for quads, you probably want to elevate the heels to some extent, bring the feet down a touch and really drive the knees forward as much as possible, because that's going to lengthen the quads a bit more and place a little bit more emphasis on them.
I take a medium stance width on the platform and focus on hitting quality depth at the bottom of each and every rep. You want to go as deep as you comfortably can without allowing your lower back to round noticeably.
I respect that as well. A lot of people, their bum will lift off the pad and their back will round significantly, contributing to the bum lifting off the pad. Don't do that. It's probably going to hurt your back. Strongly disagree with that. So we know that when we're looking at motor unit recruitment, see, we want to ideally recruit the largest motor units. Those are the ones that are going to be associated with more stimulus for growth. The larger motor units are usually the last to go offline, which means essentially they aren't the ones that are heavily recruited until you're closer to, if not at, failure, but also the last to come back online, which means you're going to have to rest longer to then be able to fully utilize them, which means to essentially get the most out of your working sets when looking at hypertrophy, you're actually going to rest for longer. I never rest for less than 2 minutes. I usually rest for about 3 to 5 minutes because we know in doing so, that is going to help optimize motor unit recruitment, which in turn means that working sets are going to be more stimulating when it comes to growth. So no, do not rest for less than 2 minutes. And if you're resting for less than 2 minutes and ready to go again, you probably aren't training hard enough.
Okay, next we're moving on to 3 sets of 8 to 10 reps on the slow eccentric leg extension. Now, even though we already hit the quads on the leg press, and that will be enough to trigger growth, remember that the big rectus femoris head of the quads isn't hit very well on leg presses.
This I do agree with. I think the leg extension is one of the few movements people probably should do, primarily due to this reason, because the rec fem isn't sufficiently targeted in other movements, whereas things like the leg extension and the sissy squat will target it. So we want to obviously implement one of those, and leg extension is typically easier, especially when looking at like full quad growth. What I disagree with is a slow eccentric. You do not need to do slow eccentrics. I typically say, for the sake of technical standardization, 2 seconds, 2 to 4 seconds, let's say, as an eccentric speed and tempo, I respect. Is that going to trigger or promote more muscle growth? No. We know that whether you do a 1 second eccentric or an 8 second eccentric, that it was going to result in the same amount of stimulus for growth. The eccentric is really not that important when it comes to muscle growth. Very quickly, I'm going to throw it out there. Train Heroic, we've changed the structure completely. So Train Heroic is essentially the group training or like community training program, which costs less than $1 a day, has a 7-day free trial, and you can essentially choose a workout that I've created for you for either at home or at the gym. You join the team, you speak in the message board, I create the workout block, which is usually about 8 to 12 weeks. You can talk to me every day on there if you want to, and also you have a say on what the next block might look like, which muscles it focuses on, movements you might want to see, etc., etc. In that, not only are you going to have access to daily communication with me, you're also going to have a full exercise library which shows examples of every movement we've programmed. You're also going to have educational bits and bobs, weekly tips, posts, all sorts, which I'll plop in the message board. And you're also going to have community support, which I think is bloody fantastic. When it grows a bit further, we're also going to look at creating a private group for everybody in there. You're also going to look at having monthly Zoom calls and Q&As with me where we can waffle about loads of stuff if you so wish. But again, that's probably a bit further down the line. Just know it's a big push for that. So if you haven't already, have a gander at the Train Heroic teams, which are always linked down below. And if one-to-one online coaching is a bit much for you, or maybe not something you can justify right now, it's a pretty affordable and also pretty fantastic alternative.
We're also using a 3-second count on the negative of every rep here. This will accomplish 2 things. First, the eccentric is likely more hypertrophic than the concentric.
That's not true. That has been heavily debunked and disproven.
And secondly, slowing down the negative will force you to use lighter loads, which should put less strain on the knees without compromising the hypertrophic stimulus of the set.
I get the lighter load on the knee situation. I kind of get it to an extent, but realistically, if your knees are healthy, that shouldn't be an issue at all. And we also know it's actually typically easier to progressively overload with heavier loads.
Right, after that, we're doing 4 sets of 15 to 20 reps on the seated calf raise. Even though I'm a bit more on the fence about seated calf raises these days than I was in the past.
Also going to kind of knock back it. I think realistically, when you look at calf development, the big thing you should probably think about is going to be the old gastric muscle, which is going to be heavily utilized with a straight leg variant. So like a standing calf raise here, I typically actually do a leg press calf raise due to the less spinal compression, but it's up to you. The thing we want to focus on here is, like I said, straighter leg variation. We like that because if you go to a seated leg variation where the knee is bent, you're working more with the soleus. We aren't that fussed about that, let's be honest. And when doing this, you do not need to high reps, as people often say. Genuinely, doesn't matter. I say to most people, I like 5 to 10 personally, but you can go as low as 3. You can do 4. Like these are all going to be stimulating reps provided the intensity is good enough. When doing a variation of calf raises, I always aim to stretch for at least 3 seconds at the bottom of every rep. Trust me, it sucks, but it's going to help.
Off the workout, we're doing 3 sets of 10 to 20 reps on the Roman chair leg raise. The reason I'm saying 10 to 20 reps is because for some people, 10 reps will be close to failure. For others, they won't be pushing it very hard until they're closer to 20 reps.
Yeah, too bad this is a fair movement. As long as you're trying to like almost roll your bum up to your chest or almost reducing the distance between the pelvis and the sternum, you're probably okay if that's what we really want when looking at like the abs. If you're just raising your legs up and down, it's going to be heavily focusing on the hip flexors, which we're not too fussed about. So I back it. I also like the idea of doing knee raises instead, maybe. Might be a bit easier. Also adding weight between the feet because that can help with the old progressive overload. A couple of things I'm going to note there. If you're going to ask me what I deem to be like the perfect leg day, doesn't exist, but I can tell you a really good leg day that targets all muscles pretty effectively. In no particular order, you order this based on your priorities. I look at having a leg extension in there. I look at having a leg curl variation in there. I look at maybe having an RDL in there as well. I look at throwing a squat pattern in there. And I'd also look at throwing a hip thrust pattern in there. That way we're working the quads in their short and lengthened position. We're working the hamstrings in their shortened and lengthened position if you do a lying leg curl, for example. We're also working the glutes in their shortened and lengthened position with the hip thrust and the RDL. You want to throw some calves in there as well? Absolutely can. I do a standing or leg press calf raise, probably the leg press calf raise myself with a straight leg, and I'd also implement something like a rope crunch as well. You've got 7 exercises there that target the quads, the glutes, the hamstrings, the calves, and the abs really effectively. How many sets? 2 of each, maybe 3 of each. It really depends. Where you place each exercise in the session is dependent on your weaknesses. Your weaknesses earlier in the session, your strength later in the session. Honestly, if I could only do 1 leg day a week, it would probably look something like that when looking at overall balance as a whole. And now my unpopular opinion is I like Jeff. I think some of what he promotes is pretty solid. I don't agree with all of what he promotes, but I, over recent times, have maybe steered away from him a bit more because I'm starting to disagree with a lot more of what he's saying. Many reasons behind this, who knows? Same with Mike Israel, whom I'll also go to a video on in the coming weeks. I think just because somebody has a huge following and is deemed to be science-based doesn't necessarily mean they know everything, and I'm not saying he ever claims he does. Although I agree with some of what he's saying, I disagree with a lot of what he's saying, and it doesn't actually align with a lot of the current research. I do understand this video is over a year old, I respect that, but I'm sure some of his stances throughout this probably haven't changed, and if they have, you may believe what is being promoted in this video, and I'm just simply maybe correcting it with updated information based on the literature and also based on maybe some of Jeff's updated opinions too. But again, like with all my videos, this is just my opinion, and I'd love to hear yours in the comment section below. So let me know. Who's your favorite online creator and why? Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my waffle about science and legs, and thank you for tolerating the video.